What is housing focused shelter? Well, here's what you need to know. I want to set the record straight because there's a lot of buzz right now about housing focused shelter. And it's really a term I introduced more than a decade ago to shift how we think about emergency shelter in the context of ending homelessness. I've called it how to be an awesome shelter. I've called it how to be an impactful shelter. And then we landed on housing focused shelter. But this concept has grown in popularity. And as it has, it's also been misunderstood, diluted, misapplied. So today I want to clear the air. What is housing focused shelter? What it isn't? And why does it matter more than ever? All right, let's get into it. Housing focused shelter is not just a bed for the night. It's a mission-driven, goal-oriented type of emergency shelter where the entire purpose is to help people exit homelessness and move into permanent housing as rapidly as possible. Every aspect of that shelter, from staffing to policies to programming to even the physical setup, is organized around housing as the outcome. So what does that mean? That means staff are trained to help people navigate the housing system. It means every conversation, whenever possible, is grounded in housing goals. It means that services remove, not create, barriers to housing. It means data is tracked on exits to housing, not just nightly occupancy. This isn't about warehousing people in mats and bunk beds. This is not about therapeutic incarceration and thinking that we need to reprogram people to get ready for housing. This is about restoring hope, reestablishing momentum, and reconnecting people to permanent housing as fast as possible. Let's be really clear on a few things. A housing-focused shelter is not simply a shelter that refers people to housing. Referrals are easy. Housing focus means doing the real work, navigating, advocating, helping people secure ID and income and accelerating access. It means getting into the weeds of helping people secure things. Housing focused shelter is not just a low barrier shelter. While reducing barriers is part of the model, housing focused shelter is about direction, not just about accessibility. It's not housing first in a shelter either. Housing first is a model of permanent housing with supports. This is an emergency service built to transition people into housing. Apples and oranges. Housing focused shelter is not a place to park people indefinitely. We try to make sure that lengths of stay are as short as possible to achieve the goal-oriented housing solution. And housing focused shelter is not about managing homelessness better. It's about resolving it. We see shelter as a process, not a destination. The core elements of housing focused shelter, if you want to build or evaluate a shelter that claims to be housing focused, you want to focus on these particular non-negotiables. Number one, housing plans, hopefully for everyone, at least for as many people as possible. Wherever possible, each guest should have an individualized documented plan that outlines next steps towards permanent housing, and the plan gets updated regularly. 2, staff roles are reoriented around housing. Frontline staff, caseworkers, intake workers, everyone's job is to talk about, plan for, and support housing goals. Even custodial and kitchen staff can help reinforce housing messaging. 3, it's lower barrier with higher engagement. You want to lower access to barriers, but you raise the bar for engagement. People are invited to participate in shaping their housing path. 4, data that tracks housing outcomes. If all you can tell me is how many people slept in your beds, you're not housing focused. We need to know how many got housed, how quickly did they get housed, who is not getting housed, and why aren't they getting housed. 5, partnerships that open housing doors. Shelters generally don't create housing, but they can create access. That means strong relationships with landlords, housing providers, public housing authorities, coordinated entry, and support service networks. So what does housing-focused engagement actually look like inside a shelter? Well, to start, it's not one size fits all, and it's not a straight line. But at a high level, here are the key stages in a well-run housing-focused shelter. We try diversion first. Before someone enters shelter, we explore whether there's a safe, appropriate alternative to staying somewhere else. Things like family reunification, short-term mediation, or temporary support might prevent shelter entry. We look at intake from a housing-focused perspective. From day one, we ask housing-related questions. Intake is not about cataloging problems. It's not just about administration. It's about uncovering housing potential. And we want supported staff resolution, especially for people who have never used shelter before. We want to provide tools and engagement to resolve their situation on their own with light touch guidance, not heavy intervention. We also need staff-assisted resolution for people who need more help. And in those instances, we need shelter staff to become active partners in the housing journey. That means things like searching listings, helping people fill out application, making calls to landlords, engaging in significant advocacy. We also need a deeper understanding and assessment of strengths and needs. If housing is not being found quickly, a more in-depth assessment helps tailor supports and identify barriers. That can include helping people on pathways to like permanent supportive housing, or even types of bridge housing or transitional housing or interim housing. We need connection to coordinated entry if no immediate housing options exist, because staff can then connect guests to the broader housing system through coordinated access or by name lists. We need to focus on some pre-chronic resolution. For those at risk of becoming chronically homeless, shelters intervene intensely with targeted housing plans before the situation becomes long-term. And for those who are already in long-term homelessness, those who are already experiencing chronic homelessness, we need very structured chronic homelessness engagement. Staff need to use assertive engagement strategies and housing-focused persistence to break through stagnation. That can include things like housing search, accompaniment to appointments, landlord mediation, or cross-system advocacy. And once someone does exit the housing, that's when we need to make sure, as necessary and appropriate based upon his or their needs, that there's community-based wraparound supports. Now, shelters don't usually provide ongoing support after someone is housed, but successful permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing or intensive case management programs can benefit from having a warm transition from the shelter provider to organizations that do provide those wraparound supports. Because it's not just about getting someone housed, it's about making sure that they stay housed whenever possible. Let's talk about the philosophical foundations of housing-focused shelter. A housing-focused shelter isn't just a strategy, it's a values-driven practice grounded in 4 key principles. 1, trauma-informed. We recognize that most people entering shelter have lived through traumatic events. Staff are trained to avoid re-traumatization, to respect boundaries, and to build safety through consistency, transparency, and compassion. Another core value being person-centered. Each person's path to housing is their own. Instead of forcing everyone through the same steps, we tailor the approach to individual needs, preferences, strengths, and goals. People lead their own planning process. Another value that we have to embrace is being strengths-based. We don't define people by their problems or their barriers to housing. We help them build on what's already working, their resilience, their skills, their existing networks, their experiences. This lens helps people see themselves as capable and valuable. And we embrace the values associated with progressive engagement. We want services to start light if someone has never experienced homelessness before and then scale up as needed. We don't need to overwhelm people with every support all at once. Instead, we need to offer the right amount of help at the right time and increase it only as necessary. Those principles, they aren't just buzzwords. They're how we treat people with dignity while keeping the focus on housing. Now, when we focus on shelter as a process, not a destination, I can say it's pretty easy to fall into the trap of thinking of shelter as a building or a bed count. But housing-focused shelter is not about the facility. It's about the process. Shelter is not the destination. It's the mechanism. It's the intervention that moves someone from crisis to resolution. Now, that process may look different for each person, but the principles remain the same. It starts with a focus on housing. It stays focused on housing. And it ends when the person has a home of their own. Thinking of shelter as a process helps us avoid complacency. It also reminds us that every policy, every staff interaction, every form someone fills out should all be part of a journey towards housing. If a person leaves shelter and hasn't progressed on that journey, the system has stalled. When shelter becomes the destination, not the bridge, we have a problem. So let's have a hard truth moment. When we keep people in shelter indefinitely, or worse, force them to jump through hoops like mandatory life skills classes, budgeting sessions, or program for compliance just to stay indoors, we're probably not helping, at least not the way that we should be. We're creating what I call therapeutic incarceration. People are technically sheltered, but they're not free. They're trapped in a system that punishes autonomy, in a system that delays progress, in a system that often re-traumatizes. Shelter is not supposed to be a place where you earn your way out. It's supposed to be a place that helps you move out. Mandatory programming may look good on paper, but it doesn't directly help someone get housed. It becomes performative, or worse, that becomes the barrier. Housing-focused shelter throws that script out. It puts trust back in people. It focuses on outcomes, not compliance. And it stops confusing stability with control. Emergency shelters were never meant to be long-term destinations, but over time, let's admit, in most communities, the system gets stuck. We start focusing more on managing shelter occupancy than resolving homelessness. We've tracked the wrong metrics. We told ourselves we were doing our best because the cots were full and the soup was hot. But people stayed stuck, cycled in and out, lost hope. Housing-focused shelter is how we shift that narrative, even in markets where housing is scarce, especially housing that's affordable. Housing-focused shelter is how we realign shelters with their broader goal of ending homelessness. And it's how we treat people like people, not problems to be contained, not problems to be solved. And it's how we help people see a future that doesn't involve lining up for a bed every night. Now, the impact of getting this right is profound. When shelters become housing-focused, people, the data proves, get out of homelessness faster. It also has been proven that staff experience greater job satisfaction. And many communities experience reductions in chronic homelessness. Oh, and let's also point out that resources tend to be used more effectively. Housing-focused shelter, at least getting to that mindset, not easy. It takes a shift in how we think, it takes a shift in staffing, it takes a shift in training, and it certainly requires a shift in accountability. But the impact? It moves shelter from being transactional to being transformational. Some final thoughts. We didn't create housing-focused shelter to make shelters more comfortable. We created it to make them more effective. So if you're in this work, ask yourself, are we just sheltering people temporarily, or are we focused on housing them permanently? Because the difference between a night off the street and a life beyond shelter, that's everything. If you want to learn more, I'll put a link in the description to the Canadian Shelter Transformation Network, which has a wealth of additional information you may find helpful and which is applicable across Canada and beyond. I'll also put in a link to the podcast done with Senator Clarkson of the Calgary Drop-In Center on the journey and results of one of the largest shelters in North America, making the transition and going through the process of becoming housing focused and the incredible results that they've seen. As always, if you like this video, like and share it with your network. Put your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching.